Hey everyone. This is our lesson on the essay you'll be writing on how Brian survived. So this essay is going to be it's a bit of a process here. You will be choosing a specific point in the story, and then writing an essay based on that choice. So what we're going to be doing here is you're going to be choosing a turning point in the story where Brian decided a course of action that significantly impacted his chances of survival. So, your main idea is I'm going to choose a point in the story where it's really important that Brian made this decision. And then what you're going to do is you're going to be explaining what led Brian to make that decision and then how it affected the book as it continued on. Right? Now, you're going to be using evidence from the story and from Survival by Numbers or other articles that you find online that talk about survival in the woods. And that's all going to be to defend your point. It's going to include evidence from the book, along with page numbers and quotes, as well as evidence from other articles, like Survival by Numbers or other sorts of things. Now, so I'm going to give you an example to sort of elaborate. So, my central idea is as follows. So Brian's decision to make a smaller pond to trap and keep fish alive near his shelter allowed Brian to be less worried about his food and spend more time dealing with bigger problems like how he was going to eventually get rescued. If Brian hadn't made that smaller pond, he would have potentially died. So that is my thesis. That's my main point. That's my argument of my entire essay. I'm going to try to prove that to you. Now, how am I going to do that? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide evidence of my idea in the story, and then I'm going to explain how it applies to my thesis. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to find evidence of this, and then reason it out, explain how it applies to my thesis. My thesis being that Brian's decision to make a smaller pond to trap and keep fish alive near his shelter allowed him to be successful in the future. I have a bunch of other words with it, but that's the idea. All right, so let's go into that. So my first round of evidence is from near the beginning of the book, and it says Brian suffered immensely from not having enough food. On page 55, it says he would have to find something to eat. Before he did anything else, he would have to have something to eat. So this is right after he had crash landed, and Brian was unbelievably weak. And my reasoning that applies back to my thesis is, you can see from this quote that Brian was struggling greatly from not having enough food to eat. He was very weak at this time, and he didn't find something. And if he didn't find something soon, he wouldn't be able to care for himself. Okay. Right after that, it talks about how his arms are weak and he can't move things, and it's very difficult for him to do. He's having a hard time thinking. That's all because he's really, really hungry. Not because he's thirsty, but because he's really hungry. And my idea is the fact that he eventually built that fish pond allowed him to no longer be hungry and have that as a problem. Okay, so that's my first round of evidence. Second round of evidence. After making his pond, Brian thought storing live fish to eat later had been a major breakthrough. It wasn't just keeping him from starving. It was trying to save ahead, think ahead. So this idea that Brian can now deal with bigger problems because he's solved his food problem. And I'm going to explain that. From this quote, you can see that Brian saw the value of his planning right away. He would have time to deal with bigger problems now that his food was dealt with. I have more evidence, so now I'm going to articles. In Survival by Numbers, it says that one of the important steps to success is to plan your next move carefully. Brian was able to take his mind off of his needs for food by building the fish pond. He was able to do a lot of things after this moment in the book. He thought of making a raft to explore the plain. He made himself a bow and arrow. All these things were possible because he had made himself that small fish pond. Evidence number 4. According to Everything You Need to Know About Foraging for Food in the Wild, an article on Popular Mechanics, so it's a website, this is an article I found, perhaps the best source of food in the wild, short of bringing down a big game animal, is low tide. And this is in reference to just water and stuff. This article talks about how to survive in the wild and explains that the sea or lakes are excellent sources of food. So the fact that Brian got this small fish pond allowed him to be more successful because he had a good source of this food for the future. Now, how does this all come together? From all this evidence I've provided, it's clear that Brian was able to plan ahead and survive in the wild because of the fish pond he built. Without it, Brian would have been spending too much time gathering food to ever had the chance to explore the plain and get rescued. So this is kind of what the step-by-step process looks like. You're going to be looking in your book and looking at articles. And sort of presenting what you think is the most important decision he makes. Mine was the fish pond. I think it's not a very good example, but I still found evidence to support it. Okay, you shouldn't choose fish pond. Do not choose fish pond. It's not a great one. It's not well thought out. There are other ones that are significantly more important for Brian's success than him just having this fish pond. But I want to use this as an example to elaborate how I want you to go through this and work on it. The idea that you are thinking of this specific moment that Brian makes this decision, how it impacts the future, why he came to that decision in the first place, and then articles that support your idea that this is a very important decision to him. Okay, so that's what our goal is of our essays. And I hope that becomes a little bit more clear to you, and you should be working on that. It's not due until Friday, so you have some time. I'm here to answer questions and offer advice. So please come to me if you're stuck or if you're having a problem. So convince me using evidence that this is all going to happen. And it should also be organized in a certain way, which is that each piece of evidence has its own paragraph and an explanation included. So if you look back at my slides, every single one of these evidences would be evidence number 1. That would be a paragraph. This would be a paragraph. This would be a paragraph. Now, you'd put words in between. You wouldn't just have, at the beginning of the book, blah, 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 and then, oh, you can see from this quote. Like, there should be more things that put into it. But the idea is to keep it organized. I would suggest having every paragraph is its own point of evidence. At minimum, you should have 3 points of evidence. But you can go more than that. That's fine. I went up to 5. But you should have at least 3 points of evidence that suggest or indicate that your thesis is correct and that the argument that you're making is well founded and that has lots of evidence to it. Okay, so I hope this was helpful, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.